Hey guys, the music scene that I was assigned was Indianapolis. Interestingly enough, from the Chicagoland area, Indianapolis isn't too far from where I live. It is a 2.5 hour drive, but that's a lot less than where it is from Memphis, or especially from Dallas. So Indianapolis, the music scene is pretty interesting because it has a lot of similarities to the Chicagoland area, but just over history and how time has passed, things have changed a lot. So without further ado, I will jump in and talk about successful artists or songwriters. This first one's a songwriter and an artist from Indy. The first person is Babyface, and he started playing the guitar at a young age. And later on in life, he moved to the keyboards. But in his early days, he was playing with a band called Manchild, and with this band, he was also playing with Bootsy Collins, which is a famous name in the music industry. And interestingly enough, Bootsy Collins is the person that he got the nickname Babyface from. Apparently, if you as you're looking at this picture, you can probably see why he was named Babyface. But later on in the '80s, he joined a band called The Dell, and this band had several R&B hits on the charts. And he and the fellow musician L.A. Reid were in this band together. But when they were in this band, they got to thinking to themselves that they could branch off and jump into songwriting and production and just create a platform and a company really where artists could come to them for songwriting and for production. So they did this and they created their own record label, which was called LA Face Records. Between Babyface and between LA Reid, many R&B hits were written and recorded, and a lot of the songs that I know I grew up on were written by Babyface and many others. So it was interesting to know that he was from Indianapolis, which I never knew. The next person is Freddie Hubbard, who was an American jazz trumpeter who got his start in the late 50s. He played with just about every jazz cat you can think of, which is kind of how the jazz realm works. If you're an amazing jazz player, you just play with all the greats. Um, in the 60s, he was playing with people like John Coltrane, Herbie Hancock, so many more. Um, and the peak of his career was really in 1970. And in 1970, he recorded two of his most famous albums, which are called Red Clay and Straight Life. These were two very successful albums that put his name even more on the map than when he was playing in the 50s and in the 60s. And I was reading an article about him, and there was the guy named Stanley Crouch, who was a music critic, and this is what he had to say about Freddie Hubbard. He said, "He's also an extraordinary, powerful player, great stamina, great range. He swung very hard, was a beautiful ballad player, and seemed to have very few limitations in terms of getting through material, whether the material was very simple or very complex. He was quite a musician." So Freddie Hubbard is a jazz legend, and many people know his music and love his music. One other jazz cat that came from Indianapolis was J.J. Johnson. He was an amazing American trombone player, and when he was 14, he started training for the trombone. But before that, he was trained on the piano, and he became successful and traveled around with great jazz orchestras like Count Basie and the Benny Carter Orchestra. Um, Once again, he played with all the greats like Sonny Rollins, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, so many more. And what's interesting about him is that actually people were amazed at how he could play the same type of licks that Charlie Parker was playing on the saxophone, on the trombone. If you've ever heard Charlie Parker's music, you know that he's playing like 50 notes a second. And it's difficult regardless. But on a slide trombone, that's even more difficult. And so there was a lot of people that actually believed that he was playing on a valve trombone instead of a slide, which would be a little bit more like playing the trumpet finger wise. But no, he played a slide trombone and was doing the things that Charlie Parker could do. Which this goes into the history and the importance of Indianapolis as a scene in general. The last two people that I just named were jazz cats, and they got their start, in the 50s, just in the earlier days. And just in general, Indianapolis had a huge jazz scene in the early 20s through the 40s, a little bit into the 50s. And come to find out, a lot of jazz musicians came from the Midwest. And this picture here is a picture of Indiana Avenue, which was the street to get all of your jazz music in the early 20th century. And actually, I was reading an NPR article which said that in the segregated years of the 20th century, many American cities with significant black populations had what was known as Main Stem, which was a primary boulevard of business and cultural activity for the African American community. So, Indiana Avenue was that spot for a lot of the black musicians that couldn't play everywhere that they wanted to play. This was the strip that you would go to get great jazz music. Just the genres in general in Indianapolis. It's really interesting how history uh, has how Indianapolis has changed with history. So around the 20s and the 40s and a little bit into the 50s, Indianapolis was all about jazz. Then around the 60s and the 70s, this city became less of a jazz scene and moved towards pop rock, alternative, and indie rock music, which that was the music of the day. This is when you have a lot of big rock bands coming out. You have your pop singers really becoming to shine, and Indianapolis moved with the times. And also in recent years, Indianapolis has gained a hip hop scene, which when you look at the trend of the music industry, hip hop is very, very popular. And just a random fun fact, just from my days in the marching band, that the Bands of America drum corps band competition is held in Indianapolis in the Colts Dome. So that's just a random fun fact that is just another weird thing about Indianapolis and music. But in general, their influence is really great for pop music. And when I mean pop music, I mean literally popular music. There's music festivals that are held in this city that cater to all the genres that were huge in the city. There's jazz festivals, there's rock festivals, and there's rap and hip hop festivals. And it's just really unique to me how this scene changes with the times. Whatever the popular genre is for the day, Indianapolis is going to graft towards it. And I believe that that's a reason why this city's music scene is so sustainable, because whatever pop music is, that's what they're going to go towards. Now, this can be a good thing, but this can also, well, this would be a great thing for the city. It is a great thing for the city. But as a musician, it seems like it would be a difficult place to live, because if you are a pop artist and as time changes and your genre is no longer popular, Indianapolis may not be a great city for you to live in anymore, because they're going to change with the times. So let's just say in the 60s and in the 70s, when rock and indie rock was huge, it's great. That's a great place to be at. But now it's more of a hip hop scene, where of course you could play your little shows, but there's not a huge demand for it anymore. Just like with jazz, which I find is interesting, because in Chicago, jazz, indie rock, pop, hip hop, those are all genres that we have here in the Chicagoland area, but they seem to all stick around. But it's just interesting to me how Indianapolis has changed with the times. So if you are a musician that's thinking about living in Indianapolis, make sure that either your genre is flexible, or you just know that eventually you're going to have to move from this city.